Hi guys! On February 3rd, 1946, in the freezing central square of Riga, thousands gathered to witness the final moments of a high-ranking commander directly responsible for the systematic elimination of over 300,000 lives across Eastern Europe. This is the factual, unvarnished account of Friedrich Jeckeln, the notorious architect of the most ruthless operations on the Eastern Front, and the uncompromising justice that ultimately ended his dark reign. Born in 1895, his early years gave little indication of the monster he would become, as he served quietly as an artillery officer during the brutal trench warfare of the First World War. However, the bitter defeat of Germany and the subsequent economic collapse provided fertile ground for extreme ideologies, leading him to join the rapidly expanding National Socialist Party in the late 1920s. His ruthless ambition, combined with a chilling capacity for administrative efficiency, quickly caught the attention of the party's elite inner circle. By 1936, he had bypassed seasoned veterans to be appointed as an SS Obergruppenführer, a rank that granted him terrifying, almost unchecked authority over vast jurisdictions. What made this commander uniquely dangerous was not just his blind fanaticism, but his cold, corporate approach to human tragedy. He viewed the eradication of designated enemy populations not as a chaotic act of war, but as an industrial logistical challenge that required meticulous planning and execution. His complete lack of empathy and absolute loyalty to Heinrich Himmler ensured that whenever the highest command required devastating operations without hesitation, this man was their primary instrument. As the drums of war echoed across Europe in 1939, his deeply ingrained methods of psychological conditioning and strict obedience transformed regular police battalions under his command into hardened units completely desensitized to human suffering. He was preparing an entire apparatus of destruction, waiting for the massive invasion of the Soviet Union to unleash a wave of unprecedented terror. This methodical preparation set the stage for one of the darkest chapters in human history, proving that the most devastating atrocities are often committed not by chaotic madmen, but by highly organized bureaucrats wielding absolute power. As the devastating blitzkrieg of Operation Barbarossa pushed deep into Soviet territory in the summer of 1941, the massive scale of the Eastern Front required administrators willing to cross every conceivable moral boundary. Recognizing his exceptional cruelty, the High Command appointed him as the higher SS and police leader for the newly established Reichskommissariat Ostland, a vast occupied region encompassing the Baltic states and parts of Belarus. It was here that he implemented what historians now chillingly refer to as his proprietary method of mass destruction, heavily relying on cold, calculated logistics to maximize operational efficiency. He quickly realized that his own specialized units were numerically insufficient to control the massive occupied populations, leading to a sinister tactical decision. He actively recruited, armed and radicalized local collaborator battalions, specifically in regions like Latvia and Ukraine, turning neighbors against each other and multiplying his lethal force exponentially. His administrative dark genius culminated in meticulously orchestrated atrocities, most notably in the treacherous ravines of Babi Yar and the freezing pines of the Rumbler forest. To ensure rapid, unresisting compliance from the victims, he devised a deeply deceptive psychological strategy, forcing populations to believe they were simply being relocated for labor assignments. The victims were instructed to pack their most valuable belongings and warm clothing, creating a false sense of security that prevented mass panic or rebellion until the very last tragic moment. Once at the heavily guarded operation sites, his chilling system demanded absolute compartmentalization. Different units were responsible for specific isolated tasks. Some managed transport, others collected the luggage, and entirely separate detachments carried out the final, devastating orders. This assembly line approach to human elimination severely reduced the psychological toll on his own men, while astronomically increasing the death toll. By late 1941, his reports sent back to Berlin were terrifyingly clinical, detailing the eradication of hundreds of thousands of lives as if they were mere inventory statistics. The sheer scale and speed of his operations shocked even the hardened military commanders of the Standard Army, solidifying his reputation as the undisputed Grim Reaper of the Eastern Front. However, the relentless tide of the global conflict eventually turned, and the supposed invincible empire began to crumble under the sheer weight of its own devastating ambitions. By late 1944, the unstoppable momentum of the Soviet Red Army advance shattered the German defensive lines, pushing the occupying forces back across the very territories they had ruthlessly terrorized. The hunter officially became the hunted, and the sprawling command structure he had violently established across Ostland collapsed into absolute chaos as Soviet tanks rolled relentlessly westward. In a desperate attempt to stall the inevitable, the High Command trapped hundreds of thousands of German troops on a peninsula in Latvia, creating the infamous Kurland Pocket. Trapped and surrounded by the vengeful Red Army, he was forced to take command of these deeply demoralized retreating forces, enforcing brutal draconian discipline to prevent mass desertion. He ordered the immediate execution of any German soldier caught attempting to flee or surrender, demonstrating that his ruthless disregard for human life extended equally to his own countrymen. Despite his fanatical resistance, the overwhelming artillery fire and endless infantry waves of the Soviet forces made any long-term defense a strategic impossibility. The absolute collapse came in early May 1945, when the remnants of the Third Reich officially surrendered, leaving the trapped commanders in Kurland with no means of escape. Attempting to blend in with fleeing refugees or regular infantrymen, the man who once controlled the fate of millions tried desperately to vanish into the chaotic aftermath of the fallen empire, but his infamy was too widespread, and the architect of the Eastern Front atrocities was quickly identified and captured alive by vigilant Soviet patrol units. Stripped of his terrifying uniform and power, he was transported under heavy guard to face intense, unyielding interrogations. The massive, undeniable mountains of captured documents, combined with the horrifying testimonies of the few survivors, left him with absolutely no room to deny his central role in the systematic tragedy. Following his dramatic capture by patrol units, the Soviet military authorities wasted absolutely no time in organizing a massive, highly publicized military tribunal, fully aware of the immense psychological and historical value of holding this specific commander openly accountable. In late January 1946, Friedrich Jeckeln was brought heavily guarded before the Supreme Military Court of the Baltic Military District in Riga, the exact same historic city from which he'd once orchestrated his vast, terrifying network of regional destruction. This was deliberately not a standard, quiet judicial proceeding hidden behind closed prison doors. The trial was meticulously designed as a massive public spectacle, a deliberate demonstration of ultimate justice held in a grand architectural hall packed with traumatized local citizens, international journalists, and surviving witnesses. For several intense, emotionally charged days, the lead military prosecutors systematically dismantled any weak defense the former commander attempted to construct, literally burying him under a sheer avalanche of captured, meticulously documented evidence. The relentless prosecution team presented terrifyingly detailed administrative ledgers, operational field reports bearing his exact ink signature, and devastatingly precise testimonies from former subordinate officers who eagerly turned against their former leader in a desperate attempt to save their own lives. The sheer volume of military paperwork captured by the advancing forces provided a chilling insight into the mundane daily bureaucracy of his total eradication system, cross-referencing ammunition expenditure with regional population census data to reveal a terrifying mathematical approach to human tragedy. What truly captivated and disgusted the observers in the tense courtroom was his chillingly calm, completely detached demeanor. He stood in the wooden dock not as a broken man seeking moral redemption, but as a rigid, arrogant bureaucrat stubbornly defending his administrative efficiency. When directly confronted with the staggering, undeniable numbers of the parish populations, he did absolutely not deny the physical events, but attempted to legally shift the ultimate responsibility to higher commands back in Berlin, arguing coldly that he was merely a highly effective, obedient instrument of state policy. This calculated defense strategy completely collapsed when prosecutors produced his own direct, handwritten orders authorizing brutal regional actions entirely independent of standard high command directives, proving undeniably that he was the active, creative architect, not just a passive participant. The tribunal meticulously detailed his highly specialized methods, emphasizing how he single-handedly reorganized the regional liquidation apparatus to maximize the daily quota of casualties, a horrific logistical innovation that shocked even the hardened, war-weary military judges overseeing the case. Throughout the grueling daily sessions, his facial expression remained a hardened mask of arrogant defiance, displaying absolutely zero remorse or human empathy for the hundreds of thousands of civilian lives he had systematically erased from existence across the Eastern Territories. Ultimately, the court officially concluded that his ruthless actions utterly transcended conventional military engagements and constituted deliberate, premeditated atrocities operating on an unprecedented industrial scale. On February 3, 1946, the heavy wooden gavel of the Soviet military tribunal finally fell, delivering a swift, uncompromising verdict that resonated across the scarred European continent, sentencing him to face the ultimate penalty. The devastating sentence was specifically ordered not to be carried out in the dark, hidden shadows of a quiet prison courtyard, as was the standard protocol for many captured enemy officials, but in the most profoundly public manner conceivable. The victorious Soviet command specifically selected the massive expanse of Victory Square, situated right in the heart of Riga, transforming a vast urban space that had witnessed years of brutal military occupation into the ultimate theatre for immediate retributive justice. The psychological messaging directed at the local population was completely unmistakable. The untouchable man who had aggressively ordered the mass elimination of the city's inhabitants would now face his own ultimate demise in front of the very people he had confidently tried to destroy. In the freezing, bitter cold of that early February morning, specialized military engineering units hastily constructed a massive, sturdy wooden structure designed specifically to accommodate multiple high-ranking condemned officers simultaneously. As word of the impending, highly anticipated event spread rapidly through the ruined, war-torn streets, an unprecedented civilian gathering began to form, creating a vast sea of humanity that stretched heavily as far as the human eye could physically see. Official historical records and photographs from that morning indicate that tens of thousands of deeply scarred individuals braved the absolutely freezing winter temperatures, creating a highly tense, electrified atmosphere heavily charged with profound collective grief, unspoken trauma, and righteous anger. This immense, sprawling crowd was notably not a chaotic, screaming mob, but rather a hauntingly silent, deeply focused assembly of wounded survivors, returning frontline soldiers, and local citizens who had endured unimaginable personal hardships under his draconian, merciless rule. They stood firmly shoulder to shoulder in the biting, icy wind, waiting patiently for the final arrival of the infamous commander who had coldly treated their families' lives as mere logistical variables in a twisted ideological equation. To ensure absolute operational security and fully prevent any desperate rescue attempts or premature physical violence from the enraged, traumatized populace, A heavily armed, impenetrable cordon of hardened Soviet combat troops completely surrounded the designated execution zone. As the scheduled morning hour finally approached, the heavy mechanical rumble of armored military transport trucks echoed loudly through the cobbled, frozen streets, officially signaling the arrival of the heavily guarded condemned men to the central square. Friedrich Jeckeln emerged slowly from the dark transport vehicle, completely stripped of all his former terrifying polished glory. The sharp, commanding uniform that had once projected absolute terror was gone, replaced by plain, unmarked dark clothing that emphasized his total, undeniable defeat. The stark, visual contrast between the absolute, unchecked power he once aggressively wielded across Eastern Europe and his current pathetic state as a completely powerless captive walking slowly toward the wooden steps offered a profound representation of a fallen empire. His final, heavily guarded walk was closely observed by thousands of piercing, unforgiving eyes, marking the very last agonizing moments before the definitive, absolute closure of one of the most catastrophic eras in human history. As he forcefully ascended the rough, splintered wooden steps of the massive public gallows, the overwhelming, heavy silence of the immense gathered crowd became noticeably heavier and colder than the freezing Baltic air surrounding them. There were absolutely no grand theatrical final speeches permitted, no defiant military salutes, and absolutely zero visible signs of last-minute human repentance from the man who had single-handedly engineered such vast, unparalleled regional devastation. Friedrich Jeckeln simply stood on the elevated platform, maintaining the exact same cold, detached rigidity that had terrifyingly defined his entire administrative military career, staring blankly out over a vast sea of faces representing the very targeted populations he had actively sought to erase. The assigned Soviet personnel, operating with extremely swift mechanical precision, finalized the necessary physical preparations, securing the thick, heavy hemp ropes around the condemned men without a single trace of hesitation or formal ceremony. At exactly the designated military moment, the primary mechanical lever was decisively triggered, and the wooden support instantly dropped away, delivering immediate, uncompromising, and irreversible justice to the supreme architect of the devastating Ostland operations. A profound, massive collective exhalation visibly swept through the tens of thousands of gathered civilian witnesses. It was noticeably not a loud cheer of joyful celebration, but rather a highly complex, heavy psychological release of years of accumulated terror, deep mourning, and unimaginable trauma. His lifeless, motionless form remained suspended high in the freezing, biting winter wind, serving instantly as a stark, visceral, and highly public monument to the definitive, absolute end of the tyrannical regime that had violently consumed the continent. This specific historic event in Riga was deliberately designed by the authorities to be one of the very last major public executions in modern European history, a highly calculated, strategic decision to provide irrefutable visual closure to a deeply broken society. The physical destruction of this high-ranking commander represented far more than just the necessary end of one dangerous man. It symbolically finalized the complete dismantling of an entire twisted system that treated human lives as completely disposable inventory. Following this highly publicized event, his dark name was deliberately relegated to the most cautionary, shadowed corners of historical military records, studied primarily by modern experts attempting desperately to understand the terrifying mechanics of extreme bureaucratic cruelty. Today, examining his complete lack of empathy stands as a chilling, permanent reminder that the absolute greatest threats to civilized humanity often do not come from loud, chaotic fanatics, but from deeply organized, quiet administrators who apply brutal corporate efficiency to the massive machinery of war. His dark story forcefully compels modern society to constantly confront the highly uncomfortable reality of how easily standard administrative structures can be violently twisted into effective tools of unimaginable destruction when human compassion is completely removed. This dark, factual documentary chapter concludes not merely with the violent fall of a ruthless tyrant, but with a permanent, echoing warning about the absolute necessity of holding such architects of tragedy fully accountable in the harsh, unforgiving light of objective history.